Hello everyone, welcome to Phone Piano, and this is going to be the first tutorial we're doing, some music lessons here. Today we're going to be starting a two-part series, and this is going to focus just on reading sheet music, how to read sheet music. We're going to go into the hypothetical scenario that you have never seen sheet music before, and you're starting to learn piano. So, with that in mind, we're going to be covering the absolute bare minimum basics here, and we will get into some more complex functionalities that you see with sheet music as well. But this will serve as an overall guide for anyone who is looking to start learning how to play piano, and learn how to play piano traditionally with sheet music. This will be a great guide for you. This is all the things that I know through 15 years of experience, and there's tons and tons of more concepts as well that I'm probably not going to cover just because there's a lot that you don't see. So this will be more of just a pretty basic introduction. So the first thing that you should know as a background before kind of diving into the different aspects of sheet music is that a lot of the terminology you're going to see or words is based out of Italian. Now, you don't typically see a lot of vocabulary being used on sheet music, but when you do, that's always a good note to keep in mind. I don't usually record just on my laptop here. I usually am on my keyboard, but for this demonstration, I'm using a software called Note Flight Online. That's what I use to create all of my compositions and covers. It's a great tool. It's free. But yeah, so without further ado, let's say this is the first time you're sitting down and you're looking. Obviously, the main thing you're going to notice is the song title, in addition to the band or artist. Um, and everyone configures theirs a little bit differently. In the case of Note Flight, it automatically generates to have the composer on the right and the lyricist on the left. Obviously, these are just, random examples I put in to show you how that would look. But beyond that, moving from the top down, the first thing you're going to see here, let me zoom in, is tempo. So you'll see this is a note, as we are all probably very familiar with. And you can see it says equals 120. And what that means is 120 beats per minute. Beats per minute is the measure that we use to denote tempo. And you're probably asking, what is tempo? Well, tempo is essentially just how fast are you playing the music. We usually use a device called a metronome that helps us basically fine tune our pacing in a song. And it runs with a series of clicks. In most cases, that would be 4 clicks. As you can see, here are time signatures in 4/4. But don't worry about that for now. We're going to be covering time signatures and key signatures in part two. So that's what tempo is. And you don't always see this for every song, but a lot of times um, sheet music will denote that for you, or it'll denote in words if there's swing or a certain methodology you have to take when approaching a new piece. Beyond tempo, we have the individual lines here. So you can see we have line 1, line 2, and line 3. This is all one cluster of a line. Now I only have 3 here, and as you can see, they're all empty just for demonstration purposes. Now when we look at each line, you'll see these little dividing lines. And between each of these is what's called a measure. So this is one measure. And as you can see here, the software is actually denoting the measures for me numerically. So there's 4 measures on this line. And through each measure, you'll notice that there's a series of 5 lines on the top and 5 on the bottom. The 5 on the top here are denoted with this funky curve symbol. This is called a clef. And more specifically, this clef is known as the treble clef. The one below it is known as the bass clef. The default orientation for these is to have the treble clef, which is assigned to your right hand, essentially, to put it simply, and the bass clef to your left hand. Now, this can change, and in fact, a lot of songs it can change pretty frequently. But we're not going to go into that right now. For now, just assume that usually when you sit down to play a song, you'll see the treble clef for your right hand and the bass clef for your left hand. Right next to that, in this first measure, on each line you'll see the key signature denoted. Key signatures can change in the song, however, it's not that frequent. And like I said, we're going to discuss these more specifically in part two. And the time signature is always denoted after that in the first measure. Time signatures can also change, but that's pretty infrequent as well. In this case, we're in 4/4. Again, we'll talk about that later. So in each of these measures, we have this series of lines. And now comes everyone's favorite part, when you start noticing notes. So what is a note? Basically put, a note, it's kind of like a language. It's an assigned value for a certain note to play. Now, obviously, I don't have a keyboard in front of me. However, I conveniently do have a keyboard here built in. And obviously, I know it looks a little wonky. But as you can see here, we have our software is telling us our bass clef and our treble clef being denoted. And you'll see in my treble clef here, I've put a G in. You can see this is C4. C4, if you didn't know, is the default key in the keyboard. It's the main primary C note that you have on a keyboard. And all these represents as different octaves. I'm going to go into a different video of learning about all of this as well on a keyboard. So you'll have to bear with me on that. But as you can see, we have one octave down, C3, C4, and C5. These are all Cs. Okay, so what I just randomly laid down here is a G. And this is what a note looks like. This is actually a quarter note. It's typically the most default value you see in a song, but that can change under different criteria. And you'll see here that the stem here, is just straight for a quarter note. You can have multiple notes dictated at one time, like so. You can have them where they are written individually on a line, or you can have them in between the lines, like this. This is an F. And you'll see when you put two notes that are back to back, like this F and G, that it will split them out sideways to share the stem. And you can put as many as you want on here now. You have to keep in mind you only have 5 fingers. So that does restrict you a little bit. Now, I'm sure you're wondering what happens if I put a note that's off of the main 5 lines. That creeps into different octaves. So as you can see, when we do that, if I were to go lower or higher, that we typically notate this with a little extension off the main body of the note. But if it's in between, then we do it above or below. And see how it splits out sideways like that? So that is what a note is. So again, a note just denotes what you have to play. Now, there's different types of notes. As I mentioned before, this is a quarter note, which in this time signature is 1 beat. And again, that can change. There are other ones. So for example, you can see up here all the different types of notes we have. So this is 1 beat. If I made it a half note, it's no longer solidly filled. It's hollow on the inside. A half note, as you can figure by the name, is 2 beats in this case. And you can see how our rests have moved, and we'll talk about rests momentarily. To take up the whole length of one measure would be a whole note in this time signature. But you can see we lose the stem, and it becomes just a note with a hole in it. Kind of looks like a donut. We can have shorter durations. This is the highest duration you can have, working its way down to how quick you play the note. You can have an eighth note, and you'll see an eighth note has a little curved stem to it. But if you put 2 eighth notes back to back, that's dropped, and it ties them with this little square bracket. And you can have this happen multiple times, as you can see. It can get even smaller. You can put in what's called a 16th note. This is all divided. There you can see it's got 2 that are curved. Now if I put them next to each other, you get 2 brackets. They can get even smaller than that, believe it or not, and play faster. You can go all the way up 32nd note. And if I put 2 32nd notes, I have 3. And though I have never played this fast of a note before, 64th. Now you have four of them. Put them next to each other, you now have four bars. All these intend to do is separate the durations of different notes. So I could have in one measure, in the case of having four beats in this measure, which again we'll talk about, I could have two quarter notes, and I could have a half note. So now you would play 1, 2, 3, and hold the note. I could have several eighth notes, where I would play it significantly faster, like so. So that's how durations work when it comes to assign values for notes. Now, on the contrary to that, we also have rests. But before we get into rests, we need to talk about how notes can be modified, and there's many different ways. But for the basics, we have the natural state, sharpened, and flattened, or sharps or flats is how you'll typically hear it be referred to. You can see here this is a B natural. And I say natural because it's a white key, and we're not modifying it in any way. Now, in this case, we're in the key of G, as we can see by this sharp, and the sharp is for F in the key of G. And again, we'll talk about key signatures more specifically in part 2. So if I put an F down, you'll see how this keyboard automatically assigns it to a black key. It's a half step up from the natural F. But if I wanted the natural F in a key signature where I can't do that, I would have to use a natural symbol, which is right here. Kind of looks like a hashtag, but don't get it confused with the pound sign, which is used for sharps. If I wanted to sharpen something, you can see here, I'm going to switch it back to a quarter note. But this is a D. Actually, let me bring this down. Bring it down an octave here. I can sharpen it. Or I can go a half step down, and instead I can flatten it. And now you'll see that it's a half step down. So those are the three main ways that we notate differences in notes, and there are many others that we're going to get into. Now, back to rests. Rests are the complete opposite of notes. Rests essentially solve the problem of what do we do when we want to tell the player not to play? Which is something no one likes to hear, right? We have different types, and you probably saw them appearing here, but basically, this is a whole rest, and that can be put in different spots. But that means that for the whole length of the measure, nothing is played in that clef, or in that hand. Now, if I put a note down, you'll see that goes away. Now we have a whole note. If I have a half note, this brings up another dash. Well, this dash is actually a half rest. That means for half the measure, nothing's played. If I change this to a quarter note, you're going to see now I have that same half, and now I have this funky looking thing. This is actually a quarter rest. It's the most typically seen rest, again. Same thing that parallels the quarter note. If I put a note down here, and I change it to an eighth note, you're going to see this funky symbol come up. This is an eighth rest, because now I have a quarter note, an eighth rest, and a half rest. All of this adds up to 4 beats in one measure. If I change this to a 16th, now you're going to see it's divided again. I have a note that I'm playing that's a 16th note, remember the double staff? And I have now what is 16th rest. You'll see it's the same design, but you add on that little curled end on the bottom. And again, this can carry on and on and on. 32nd, 64th rest. And that's mainly how rests work. And we try and simplify it as much as we can, or at least that's typically the style I like to do it for. So for example, if I had two quarter notes, it wouldn't really make sense for me to put in 4/8 rests because 2/8 rests equals a quarter rest. So I could simplify it down. But then I could technically simplify it down again and take 2 quarter rests and make it into a half rest. It makes sheet music a lot less cluttered if you can simplify things down. Now, beyond rests, we have another concept that's called what I call rhythm dot, or most people know them as a dotted note, but the name's interchangeable. And basically, what that does is it adds half the original note's duration value on top. So, for example, if I had a half note and I added a rhythm dot, you'll see now that half rest changed to a quarter rest because, again, a half note's default duration is 2 beats. So that means that we've added one additional beat. So now this is 3 total beats being held. If I had this as a quarter note and I dotted it, you would see that this adds on an eighth note and that we have an eighth rest here to take that place. And it can go on and on and on in that same principle, right? 16th now. So that's how rhythm dots work. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover for part one. In part two, we're going to be looking again at key signatures and time signatures. We're going to be looking at dynamics and how that affects the volume of the piece and how to read it, ties, tempo, and a lot of other, a little bit more complex concepts. But this should give you a very solid foundation of now to understand what you are seeing and observing when you look at sheet music.